Imagine working your dream job at one of the most famous palaces in the world. You're young, excited, and ready to serve royalty. But instead of feeling honored, you find yourself hiding in corridors, trying to avoid your boss. You're brought to tears, screamed at over curtains, and treated like you're invisible. This isn't just any workplace nightmare. This is what it was like to work for Prince Andrew, and today we're going to hear the shocking truth from someone who lived through it all. Charlotte Briggs was only 21 years old when she got what she thought would be the opportunity of a lifetime. It was 1996, and she had just landed a job at Buckingham Palace as a maid. But there was something unusual about this particular position. Nobody wanted it. Other staff members warned her about it. They whispered about tantrums, about screaming fits, about someone who was impossible to please. That someone was Prince Andrew, the Queen's third child, who had just moved back into the palace after his divorce from Sarah Ferguson. Charlotte didn't know what she was getting herself into, but she needed the job. She thought to herself, how bad could it really be? After all, this was a prince who had served his country in the Falklands War. This was someone born into one of the most respected families in the world. Surely the rumors were exaggerated. Surely he would treat his staff with dignity and respect. She couldn't have been more wrong. From her very first days on the job, Charlotte realized something was very different about Prince Andrew compared to the other royals she encountered at the palace. She had worked with ladies-in-waiting before, and they were kind, considerate people who did things for themselves. They treated the staff like human beings. They said please and thank you. They understood that everyone was working together to keep the palace running smoothly. But Andrew was completely different. He was what Charlotte described as extremely demanding, and she found herself doing everything she could to avoid running into him. One of the strangest things Charlotte had to deal with was Andrew's stuffed animal collection. Yes, you heard that right. A grown man, a prince who was nearly 40 years old, had a bed full of teddy bears. But this wasn't just a casual collection of childhood memories sitting on a shelf. These bears had to be arranged in a very specific way, and if you got it wrong, there would be consequences. Charlotte was actually given a full day of training just to learn how to arrange these stuffed animals. The palace provided her with a laminated instruction sheet that showed exactly where each bear needed to be placed throughout the day. The bears had to be removed from the bed in the morning and placed in specific locations around the room. Then at night, they had to be returned to the bed in precise positions. There was also a stuffed hippo and a black panther that needed to be arranged just right in relation to his colored throws. The pillows, which were embroidered with Andrew's royal crest, had to be placed in the exact center of his canopy bed after the mattress was turned. His nightclothes had to be laid out carefully on the bed in a particular way. Charlotte told reporters that the whole thing was so peculiar, so bizarre, that she couldn't believe it was real. But it was her job, and she had to do it perfectly every single time. If even one bear was out of place, Andrew would notice. He would shout and scream at the staff. Former Royal Protection Officer Paul Page later confirmed this behavior, explaining how Andrew would absolutely lose his mind if the cuddly bears weren't put back correctly. Think about that for a moment. Here's a man who commanded respect as a member of the royal family, someone who was supposed to represent dignity and grace, throwing tantrums over teddy bears like a small child. It wasn't just her behavior. It showed a complete lack of respect for the people working for him. But the teddy bear incident was nothing compared to what happened with the curtains. This is the story that Charlotte says still haunts her, the moment that brought her to tears and made her question whether she could continue working for the prince. One evening, Andrew called down from his office with a request. He wanted someone to close the curtains in his room. Now, these weren't ordinary curtains. They were massive, heavy drapes that stretched from the floor all the way to the ceiling, as high as a house. But here's the thing that made Charlotte's blood boil. Andrew was sitting right next to these curtains. He could have reached out and closed them himself in seconds. Instead, he demanded that a maid come up and do it for him. Charlotte described him as lazy. He would sit at his desk, literally within arm's reach of the curtains, and call down for someone to come close them. On this particular night, Charlotte had to put on her evening dress, run up 4 flights of stairs, and close these incredibly heavy curtains while Andrew sat there watching her. She struggled with the weight of them, doing her absolute best to pull them closed. When she finished, she walked back out into the corridor, exhausted and probably hoping she could finally rest for the evening. That's when Andrew came storming out of his office. He was screaming at her, using language that would make most people's faces turn red. "Can't you do anything right?" he yelled at her. Charlotte was confused and terrified. What had she done wrong? She had closed the curtains just as he asked. But apparently, she had left a tiny gap where the two curtains met. These curtains were so heavy that getting them to meet perfectly in the middle was nearly impossible, but Andrew didn't care about that. He didn't care that Charlotte had dropped everything to run up 4 flights of stairs to do something he was too lazy to do himself. All he cared about was that tiny gap, and he made sure she knew how angry he was about it. Charlotte was only 21 years old. She had very little life experience. She was doing her best in a job that nobody else wanted. And now she was standing in a palace corridor being screamed by a prince over curtains. She wanted so badly to say something back to him. She wanted to tell him to get up and close his own curtains. She wanted to point out that he had fought for his country in the Falklands, but apparently couldn't stand up to close a pair of drapes. But she couldn't say any of that. When you work for royalty, you have to absorb the abuse. You have to stand there and take it, no matter how unfair or ridiculous it is. So Charlotte stood there and absorbed his anger, and then she went somewhere private and cried. It was awful, she said. Absolutely awful. This kind of treatment wasn't a one-time thing. Charlotte said she often tried to hide from Andrew while she was working. She would time her tasks carefully, trying to clean his rooms and complete her duties when she knew he wouldn't be around. The other staff members understood. They had all dealt with his behavior at some point. Everyone knew that working for Prince Andrew meant walking on eggshells, never knowing when he might explode over something small and insignificant. The contrast between Andrew and other people Charlotte met at the palace couldn't have been more stark. She once had the incredible honor of meeting Nelson Mandela, the former South African president who had spent decades fighting for equality and justice. Mandela, one of the most respected leaders in world history, actually hugged Charlotte. He treated her with warmth and kindness, recognizing her as a fellow human being deserving of respect. And here was Prince Andrew, someone born into unimaginable privilege, someone who had never struggled for anything in his life, treating her like she was dirt under his shoe. Charlotte said you couldn't get a bigger contrast between the two men. One was humble and kind despite everything he had overcome. The other was entitled and cruel despite having everything handed to him. Other palace staff members came forward with their own stories about Andrew's bizarre behavior. One particularly strange incident involved a bathroom dispute with his older brother, Prince Charles. When Andrew was 39 years old, he apparently placed his toiletry bag in Charles's bathroom. The staff politely tried to tell him that he had put his items in the wrong bathroom, that this was Charles's space, not his. But Andrew refused to move his belongings. He just flat out refused, like a stubborn child who doesn't want to share their toys. This created what former Buckingham Palace maid Jeanette McGowan called a bizarre standoff. The two bathrooms were exactly the same. There was nothing different or special about Charles's bathroom. It was just a matter of respect and boundaries. But Andrew wouldn't budge. The situation got so ridiculous that Queen Elizabeth herself had to step in and tell her son to move his things. Only after the Queen personally intervened did Andrew finally agree to move his toiletry bag. Jeanette McGowan said that Charles was very grown up about the whole situation, which was more than you could say for Andrew. Here was the future King of England acting like a mature adult while his younger brother threw a tantrum over a bathroom. These stories paint a picture of someone who never really grew up, someone who was so used to getting his way that he couldn't handle even the smallest inconvenience. But Andrew's problems went far beyond being demanding and childish with the palace staff. His behavior in his personal life was about to explode into an international scandal that would eventually cost him everything. Andrew had been friends with Jeffrey Epstein, an American financier who was convicted of sex trafficking. This friendship had raised eyebrows for years. People questioned why a member of the British royal family would associate with someone who had such serious criminal charges against him. Even after Epstein's conviction in 2008, Andrew continued to spend time with him. In fact, there are photographs and flight logs that show Andrew visiting Epstein in New York in 2010, years after everyone knew what kind of person Epstein really was. Then came the allegations from Virginia Giuffre. She claimed that she had been trafficked by Epstein and that she was forced to have relations with Prince Andrew on 3 separate occasions when she was only 17 years old. One of these alleged incidents happened in London in 2001. There was even a photograph of Andrew with his arm around Giuffre's waist, with Epstein's associate Ghislaine Maxwell standing in the background. Andrew and his supporters claimed the photo was fake, but it looked very real to most people who saw it. Giuffre said that Epstein paid her $15,000 to be with Andrew in London. The allegations were serious, disturbing, and impossible to ignore. In 2019, Prince Andrew made a decision that would change his life forever. He agreed to do an interview with the BBC's Newsnight program to address the allegations and explain his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. His PR advisor at the time, Jason Stein, strongly advised against the interview. Stein understood that this wasn't something that could be fixed with a single television appearance. He knew Andrew needed a long-term strategy to rebuild his reputation, not a high-stakes interview that could blow up in his face. But Andrew didn't listen. He thought he could charm his way out of the scandal. He thought he could explain everything and make people understand. Stein was so concerned about the decision that he actually quit, walking away from the job rather than be part of what he knew would be a disaster. Stein was right to be worried. The interview, which lasted 58 minutes, was an absolute catastrophe. It's been called one of the worst interviews in television history. Andrew's answers were bizarre, defensive, and completely tone-deaf. When asked about meeting Virginia Giuffre, he said he had no recollection of ever meeting her, despite the photographs showing them together. He tried to explain away one of the allegations by saying it couldn't be true because on that particular night, he was at a Pizza Express in Woking with his daughter. The excuse sounded so ridiculous that it became an instant meme on social media. But perhaps the worst part of the interview was what Andrew didn't say. He never expressed clear sympathy for Epstein's victims. He never directly denounced Epstein's horrific crimes. He had the perfect opportunity to show compassion and remorse, to acknowledge the suffering of the women who had been abused, but somehow those words never came out of his mouth. At the end of the interview, when the presenter Emily Maitlis gave him one more chance to say something meaningful, he still couldn't think to mention the victims. Instead, he described Epstein's behavior as conduct that was unbecoming. Unbecoming. That was the word he chose to describe sex trafficking and the abuse of young women. Maitlis repeated the word back to him with obvious disbelief in her voice, giving him a chance to realize how absurd it sounded. But Andrew didn't seem to understand what he had done wrong. The public reaction was swift and brutal. People were outraged. Social media exploded with criticism. One poll by a British television show found that 81% of viewers thought Andrew should retire from royal duties. Media experts and royal biographers tore apart his performance. Catherine Meyer, who wrote a biography of Prince Charles, said that the interview entirely erased the victims. She pointed out that even when given multiple chances to express sympathy, Andrew couldn't do it. The interview that was supposed to clear his name instead destroyed what was left of his reputation. The consequences came quickly. Prince Andrew announced that he would step back from his public royal duties. This wasn't a temporary break. It was essentially the end of his career as a working royal. But things were about to get even worse for him. In October of 2025, King Charles III took an unprecedented step. He initiated a formal process to strip his younger brother of all his royal titles, honors, and styles. This included removing the title of Duke of York, and even the style of Prince and His Royal Highness. Andrew was no longer to be referred to as a prince. He would now be known simply as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, like any other private citizen. This was a stunning fall from grace. Just a few years earlier, Andrew had been a senior member of the royal family, representing Britain at official events around the world. Now he had no titles, no official duties, and a reputation in ruins. The British government was even working to strip him of his honorary military title of Vice Admiral of the Royal Navy. Everything he had been given by birth, all the privilege and prestige that came with being the Queen's son, was being taken away. And now, as of just a few days ago, the situation has taken another turn. Democratic members of the United States House of Representatives have sent a letter to Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, formally requesting that he appear before Congress for a transcribed interview about Jeffrey Epstein. 16 lawmakers signed the letter, asking him to participate in the Oversight Committee's investigation. It's a remarkable moment. A man who was once untouchable as a member of the British royal family is now being called to testify before the United States Congress like any other witness in a criminal investigation. So what do we learn from all of this? What does Charlotte Briggs's testimony, combined with everything else we know about Prince Andrew, tell us about the man behind the title? It tells us that position and privilege don't automatically make someone worthy of respect. It tells us that how you treat the people who work for you, the people who have less power than you do, reveals your true character. Andrew could have been kind to Charlotte Briggs. He could have said thank you when she ran up 4 flights of stairs to close his curtains. He could have arranged his own teddy bears. He could have moved his toiletry bag without his mother having to intervene. These were such small things, but he couldn't do them because he believed he was above basic decency. And when it came to the serious allegations against him, when it came to showing compassion for victims of abuse, he failed again. He was given every opportunity to do the right thing, to show empathy, to take responsibility in some way. But he couldn't do it. His privilege had protected him for so long that he thought he was invincible. He thought he could explain everything away, that his title would shield him from consequences. But eventually, the truth catches up with everyone, no matter how powerful they think they are. Charlotte Briggs' story matters because it shows us the early warning signs. Long before the world knew about Epstein and the allegations and the disastrous interview, Charlotte saw who Andrew really was. She saw the tantrums, the entitlement, the complete lack of empathy for others. She saw a man who believed the rules didn't apply to him, who believed that other people existed only to serve him. And she was brave enough to speak about it, to share her experience so that others would understand the truth. The fall of Prince Andrew is one of the most dramatic royal scandals in modern history. It's a story about power and privilege, about how fame and titles can protect people for a while, but can't protect them forever. It's about the importance of believing victims and holding people accountable even when they're royalty. And it's a reminder that how we treat the people around us, especially those with less power, is a true measure of who we are. If this story opened your eyes to something you didn't know before, if it made you think differently about power and privilege and accountability, then please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this story. And subscribe to this channel because we're not afraid to tell the truth about the people in power, no matter how famous or important they think they are. The truth matters, and together we can make sure it's heard. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.